7th and 8th of July, leaders of 19 countries which comprise 80% of the total world GDP and 2/3 of the world's population met in the city-state of Hamburg, Germany to discuss various globalist policies of an international scale, from climate change to migration to terrorism. In attendance were world leaders from the planet's most powerful nations, from Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin to EU leader and German Chancellor Angela Merkel, a native of Hamburg. This meeting, the G20 conference, was met with substantial protests from anti-fascists or Antifa and their Black Bloc, who proceeded to burn their own city. These peaceful protests, as they were supposed to be, were accompanied by a rash of violent and massively destructive riots carried out by our good friends in Antifa and the Black Bloc, who were out in a fit of rage and surely what they believe is righteous indignation at the mere existence of these politicians in their city discussing, strangely, the very self-same type of globalist legislation towards world government, including unvetted immigration and stricter regulations on industries for the purpose of artificially growing and creating green technology that is currently economically unfeasible at a large scale, as they themselves advocate for. Weird, right? But we will get into the absurdity and hypocrisy of Antifa and the Black Bloc in detail. After all, they certainly are some of the most hypocritical and absurd people on the planet. But before we get too much into the details, I want to describe the protests, or let me be more accurate, the riots to you. And I believe that we need to discuss these riots for a number of reasons. First and foremost, because outside of Germany, these riots are receiving very little media attention. As of the 8th of July, that is the day I am recording this is the third full day of protests, this is the front page of The Guardian in the United States. While you may see some reference of the conference and Trump's involvement, as well as this lovely and completely unrelated, non-propagandized piece about how difficult it is to be an illegal alien in the United States, I mean, it's so hard to break the law, you will see no mention of the rampant destruction and violence occurring on the streets of Hamburg that went on into the early morning hours of the previous night from when I got this screenshot. So far, reports are still mostly unconfirmed, but I've seen estimates of as many as 197 police officers of the 15,000 deployed to, weirdly protect the 19 most powerful leaders of the world. Having been injured, with 83 confirmed arrests and 17 detentions, according to the Hamburg police on Twitter, which itself is rife with videos of the city burning, as the police use relatively non-violent methods of riot suppression, including water cannons. And as an aside, let me preface this entire video with a statement that I am no cheerleader for the police, but this is not America, this is Deutschland, so keep that in mind. But yes, the police are using relatively non-violent manners of suppression in an attempt to maintain a semblance of order amongst these protesters, whose numbers have ranged from initial estimates of approximately a mere 1,000 up to high and extreme estimates from some outlets to the tune of 50,000 up to maybe even 100,000 protesters. 50 to 100 fucking thousand people running wild like dogs in a city of 1.8 million people would be a disruption of insane public normalcy, even if all 50 to 100,000 of them were peacefully protesting and peacefully protesting alone, which of course they were not. Oh, wait, yes, I mean, of course they were all peaceful protesters. Just ignore the fires and the looting and the destruction of private property. As we'll soon learn, that is all, of course, a misnomer and a misrepresentation of these peaceful, black-clad 20-somethings innocently taking selfies in front of, well, let's just call that a display of modern art, shall we? Yes, friends, as we will all soon learn, we will find how Antifa, as usual, didn't do nothing, and as usual, is only reacting logically to the oppression of their attempts at open dialogue. Yep, no violence to see here, just peaceful protesters dressed like clowns, of course. Just ignore the fires and looting and rioting behind the Black Bloc curtain, huh? Now I want to get into a little bit of the history of G20 and other summits similar to it, but first I want to cover just a few of the facts. Yes, the real facts, the facts behind the Black Bloc curtain. And yes, I know facts are hate speech, but since you cannot have illegal opinions in Germany, as a proud resident of Burgerland, let me use my racist capacity for freedom of speech to lay out for you the destruction that has occurred in Hamburg. More than a dozen cars have been burned, the majority of which are not Lambos belonging to the rich bourgeoisie pigs meeting at the summit that Antifa claims to be protesting, but rather shitty old VWs, probably owned by the working class. Several shops were looted to complete decimation, as we can see here, including tech shops and grocery stores. Now, a grocery store, maybe you could argue that you're taking the food to go redistribute to the population, redistribute the wealth. But the cell phone stores? Think you're doing that for you, boo. Yes, you're totally helping the working man, you Black Bloc millennials, by breaking in and destroying the livelihood of shop owners, all in the name of the proletariat, and fighting back against economic globalism to stick up for that working man from whom you're thieving. Additionally, innocent peddler of cheap Swedish shit IKEA was burned by protesters, clearly irate at their inability to follow the simple directions and assemble their hipster furniture with ease. Again, this is just the tip of the iceberg, all on top of the nearly 200 officers injured. This, friends, and the countless fires set on the streets of Hamburg. This is the behavior from Antifa that we have seen in the past in the United States, that we are now seeing in Hamburg, and that we will continue to see, as we have seen across Europe in the past as well. And though I'm sure by the end of this entire mess we will learn once again about how they're all just innocent boys and girls who are incapable of wrongdoing, merely expressing their rational gripes with the clearly far-right local government for allowing this summit to occur, these, friends, are the facts. This is the destruction, this is the violence, this is the injury. These are the real outcomes from the Hamburg G20 riots. Destruction, violence, and ruination of a city. Now you may be saying, well, of course the people of Hamburg, of course all 50 to 100,000 of those local citizens of that city of 1.8 million, totally none of whom have been bussed in to exacerbate this riot. No, not at all. No, those citizens are reasonably irate because this G20 summit is hosting evil, far-right, demonic despot Donald Trump. Really? Of course, it's obvious. The right is to blame for allowing such a horrible person access to their city. But friends, I think you'd be a bit wrong there. Summits such as G20 have a long history of riling up Antifa and the Black Bloc. In 2010, the G20 summit in Canada led to the largest mass arrest in the nation's history, with over 900 protesters being detained. In Italy in 2001, we'll take a little looky-loo here, the G8 conference was similarly interrupted by protesters, to which the Italian police responded a bit more militantly than mere riot shields and billy clubs and the occasional water cannon. In short, violence and rioting in the wake of these summits is nothing new, and as such, attribution of the violence to Donald Trump or right-wing politics is, frankly, politically and historically illiterate. But don't you worry, friends, that certainly won't stop these same Antifa commies who will in one moment attack the Polizei and the very next beg for their assistance, from blaming any negative press their massive temper tantrum does garner internationally as being the fault of right-wing instigation and a fascist police state. I mean, really, is there any difference between the police in Hamburg attempting to desperately break up the looting, rioting, and arson, and the Free Corps rolling up and shooting commies in the back for pulling the exact same shit they were pulling 80 years ago? Yes, of course this is all the fault of Donald Trump, and if it's not the fault of Donald Trump, surely it's the fault of the far-right-leaning Hamburg government that would allow such a vile conference to be held within the city. Except, let's take a look at the government of Hamburg, shall we? The city-state of Hamburg has 121 seats that represent the local government. Of these, 58 are held by the Social Democratic Party. That's essentially the Socialist Party of Germany. Now, it's a bit more complex than that, but 58 seats. Another 20 are held by the CDU, the Christian Democratic Union, that is the party of Angela Merkel. 11 more seats are held by Der Linke, the Left Party. 9 are held by the Classical Liberal Party, the FDP, or Free Democratic Party. 15 more are held by Grüne, that is the Green Party. And finally, a paltry 8 seats are held by the only conservative party in representation in Hamburg, the Alternative for Deutschland, or the AfD. I point this all out to indicate that Hamburg is very much predominantly a left-leaning city, with little support for right-leaning politics. Although the mere presence of Donald Trump has already been blamed for the violence and riots, I would imagine, given the German government's condemnation of right-oriented terror and violence with a simultaneous blind eye being cast toward left-leaning violence, that the right, specifically the AfD, will catch some portion of the blame for the burning of Hamburg, be their threats explicit yet unidentifiable, I mean, where the fuck are they, or merely implicit through the very existence of potentially right-leaning individuals in the city. And I don't say that without basis either. Even the fucking mayor of New York City went to Hamburg, not to attend the G20, but to protest Trump as if him existing at the summit was somehow problematic. Jesus Christ, I hate that word. Conveniently blowing off the funeral of a New York City police officer in the process, by the way. Yeah, real fucking classy. and we'll get into more detail on how the mere presence of perceived right-leaning individuals was so triggering at this event. Simply put, Hamburg is a left-leaning city with predominantly left-leaning citizens, and while the sheer numbers of young millennials in black costumes reaching the tens of thousands, if not 100,000, may be suspect, what is even less likely, I would suggest, is the possibility that these riots were somehow caused or spurred by right-leaning extremists. And while at this point, as I record this, I have found only such sentiments being said on forums and comment sections, I would not be surprised, nor should you, if that becomes the common narrative in the days to come. That despite the far left-leaning public of Hamburg, that the right was in some way responsible for this behavior coming from Antifa and the Black Bloc. And we need look no further than the way the police are being portrayed than to get a sense of that. Already, claims of police violence have become deeply incorporated in the narrative gestalt of these incidences. Nora, a 27-year-old Black Bloc protester, said to Reuters in regards to the police, quote, "We just want them to listen to us and take our ideas seriously," she said. How do they want these young people not to be angry when they dismiss them all as a bunch of violent thugs? Gee, that's a tough one, Nora. I wonder why they might be dismissing you all as a bunch of violent thugs when you act like a bunch of violent thugs. Perhaps if you could just for a moment stop burning and looting, someone might take a moment to process your complaints seriously. Then again, you see how society is like a give and take? You have to stop burning for a second for us to start listening. Then again, this is an important point. Nora, could you actually explain what your concerns are regarding the G20? No?
Any questions? No?
Because I have yet to see a single Antifa or Black Bloc member express the explicit purpose of this protest beyond fucking capitalism. Of course, the irony here is, again, obvious, given that summits such as G20 are globalist-leaning and seek international legislation that would force green energy solutions and open borders immigration, both things that these communist and anarcho-communist protesters are in support of, further indicating how very little I believe they understand about the thing they are in such violent opposition toward. Further, Antifa sympathizers, even if they do not totally support or call themselves part of the Black Bloc, such as 28-year-old Rebecca Schmuck, gee, that name's apt, claim police should have ignored the few of them wearing masks, and maybe no violence would have happened. Yes, those few and far between. If only the police had ignored the few and far between several thousand of them, this could all have been avoided. This is the way the entire story is being spun, friends. That despite the countless images and video footage that depicts hundreds of Black Bloc radicals setting fire in the name of the proletariat, only to stop momentarily to take a selfie with their iPhone that mommy or daddy bought them, that was an aberration. That the average protester in Hamburg was peaceful. That the violence and the burning and the looting should be ignored. All evidence to the contrary that the majority of the protesters were peaceful is mere propaganda, and the police should have simply just laid down on their sides or on their faces and allowed themselves to be kicked and beaten by these mental children as they burned cars, homes, and businesses of the working class, all in the name of communism, which has totally never been tried before, not really, and that's why we need to keep burning shit, all in the name of our failed, never tested system of government. Let's try it out then, shall we?
Let's see what it does with this fine miniature boxcar of industrial coke.
Okay. Oh, yeah, look at that. That's amazing.
Let's see, it's pumped from the Veterans Tap Dance Administration.
Goes up here to the Assistant Secretary of Leftovers.
Flip-flop down to the Secretary of Cover.
Right. Now watch it go now. Around the Department of Spies.
Into the office of the Secretary of Failure himself. Wouldn't you know? That's shoes for industry, Charlie.
No. Instead, of course, what the leftist media, as it is scarcely reporting on these riots outside of Germany, is willing to show is not the burning or the violence, but rather young people dressed in clown costumes, evoking the flower down the barrel imagery of the 1960s free speech movement. Yet this is obvious propaganda, with the very self-same rioters posing for shots with peace signs mere moments after destroying private property. This, however, is the narrative, that the left is morally infallible and beyond reproach. As such, is it any wonder there is an entire generation of young people who are outraged when there are consequences for their actions? After all, they believe that they are moral deities among mere mortals. They have never even thought to question their own beliefs because they are incapable of wrongdoing from their own mental outlook. They believe that they are above questioning. They are always right and they never lie.
And you can believe me, because I never lie, and I'm always right. So wake up and take a look at your only logical choice. Me, George Tirebiter.
Paid for by the Tirebiter for Political Solutions Committee, Sector R.
God damn, I'm making a lot of Fireside references this video, aren't I? For a local exemplar of this mindset, however, we need look no further than journalist and photographer Søren Kohlhuber, who has worked for a variety of German news outlets as he walked around the streets, photographing conservative political commentator Lauren Southern, as well as centrist and neutral journalist Tim Pool, for the express purpose of tweeting out their location and appearance at the day and time to members of Antifa so that they may be harassed, attacked, and who knows what else. Likely worse, I would imagine, in this sick individuals' hopes and dreams. The violence was not even limited to Poole and Southern, but extended beyond to another person who had the fucking brazen audacity to merely walk alongside Tim Pool as Antifa moved in like a bunch of rabid animals to attack for merely occupying the same space as known repugnant centrist Timothy Pool. Now I will say this, and this is important. Lauren Southern was in fact wearing an Identity Europa shirt at this protest. Identity Europa, if you're not familiar with it, is a relatively prominent white nationalist organization in Germany at an Antifa protest. Jesus Christ, Lauren, you're kind of asking for it. What the fresh fuck did you think you were doing here? Hide your goddamn power level. Well, not among one of the numerous banned symbols associated with Nazism that are illegal in Germany. Sporting a shirt advocating white ethno-nationalism would be tempting retaliation in the best of circumstances, to say nothing of being in the middle of a far-left, anti-fascist, if in name only, considering the fascist-like behavior of Antifa, riot. Frankly, yeah, in a sense, is that not asking for it, huh? I have very little sympathy when you start out doing shit like that. Listen, Lauren, these people will attack you for nothing other than recording their own violent behavior, as we have seen. Violent behavior which they very much take pride in until it is made aware of by the rest of the world, as they did with this journalist. It baffles the mind then why one would wear a white identitarian t-shirt to such an event for any purpose other than as an attempt to instigate violence or some sort of incident. Again, of course, I don't think anyone's really asking for violence here, nor do I blame her or say she deserves it. That's absurd. But there is a semblance of common sense seemingly lacking here. If I'm going to say don't go to a shitty neighborhood flashing a stack of Hundies, Lauren, don't go to an Antifa far-left protest in Germany wearing a white Identity Europa shirt. Jesus Christ. Oh, but I am an equal opportunity offender, of course, so I will have to point out in contrast the hypocrisy of Søren Kohlhuber, whose work not only most recently appeared in an article where he was seemingly lamenting that there just weren't enough actual neo-Nazis at a recent far-right demonstration in Germany to really get anyone's Luftwaffe engines fired up, but who merely days before this protest against the evils of capitalism posted on his Facebook asking for his fans and followers to purchase t-shirts from him. Gee, isn't capitalism just the worst? After all, what need for these narco-commies have for money anyway? They're just burning and looting out of the goodness of their hearts to help the proletariat, right? So while there has been some spurious and questionable public information regarding the funding of protesters, most of what I have seen, as has been backed up by various people that I have asked who speak German, since I certainly don't, the validity of this information has been indicated to be little more than satire. I found this article from the Taz that kept being brought up as evidence that Antifa was being paid, however, it does appear to be false. Despite this, I am still skeptical, of the possibility that various members of these groups are being bussed into various areas for protest. As I mentioned, with 50 to up to 100,000 protesters, it seems unlikely to me, just from a statistical standpoint, that the majority of these people are originating from Hamburg itself. And as I've said, while I don't have any actual evidence of this, and any evidence you're going to find is sparse, potentially satirical, potentially fake, I do have this. And take this with about 1,000 grains of salt, but here it is. I found these screenshots that were posted on 4chan from a supposed Antifa chat that alluded to as much. That is, that Antifa were being bussed in or driven into the city of Hamburg to protest, suggesting that despite the obvious hypocrisy of an anti-capitalism protest not only being funded, but with anti-capitalist protesters being driven to said event, yet it seems that the posters find no real conflict of interest. No, not at all. Just wave that away in your mind. Don't think too deeply about the things that you believe in. That will just hurt your brain. Additionally, currently, as of the time of my recording this, one of the major organization websites utilized by Antifa, Indie Media, is down, indicating that there may be a cleansing of sorts going on. Again, obviously, I cannot confirm the validity of these screenshots, and as with the articles that I've pointed out appear to be satire, it seems that many of the claims of Antifa being paid to protest, at least in Germany, are unsubstantiated. However, I do find the sheer number of protesters to be suspect, and as such, while I implore anyone watching this to please not misunderstand me, there is nothing here I can do to prove or substantiate these posts. These are completely sourceless claims, and as such should be treated as nothing more than speculation, but is something we should perhaps consider given the mere number of protesters and the size of the city of Hamburg. But I hate speculation, so let's instead turn to something I can quantify. I am rarely concerned with things that I cannot quantify, and instead let's look at this poll from the July Deutschland Trend Report, which found that while the majority of citizens found that the costs involved with G20 may be exorbitant, most also saw the value in the proceedings of the G20 summit. Moreover, I want to point you towards this statistic, indicating that 79% of German citizens polled did not believe that violence in riots was justified, which these riots were in fact very well anticipated in response to the summit. Not surprising, given, again, Antifa openly posts about their intentions and organization of these protests online. This is interesting because it indicates that the German people are not in favor of these violent protests, despite the left-leaning government and support of the left-leaning government. Despite the continual low polling for the AfD and other conservative-leaning groups in Germany, to me, these data indicate that there could be a change occurring in public perception in the nation, at least in terms of willful acceptance of far-left extremism. While it is a small concession to simply indicate that people are not supportive of violent riots, it could serve at least as a measure that this is no longer going to be tolerated without question. And it is behavior we must condemn. Of all the horrific images of burning and destruction that have come out of this riot in Hamburg, of all of it, I think there is no scene more emblematic of the future we must fight against than this. Yes, that is a couple fucking openly on a balcony in public as the Black Bloc burn shit in the streets below. This is some Mad Max type nonsense, is it not? This is the death toll of Western civilization. Well, let me not be so melodramatic, but this certainly seems to be ringing in the end times, does it not? As such, we must ask, what is the goal of this violent destruction? What are you actually trying to accomplish here, Antifa? The end of civilization? Is that your actual goal? I have to ask, because I frankly cannot determine what the purpose of these riots are, and moreover, I don't think they can determine what the purpose is either. As I've explicated many times, I'm not a globalist. I don't agree with globalism on principle, nor with globalist agenda meetings such as the G20. I do understand that there are benefits and positive outcomes that these meetings may lead to, such as the ceasefire agreed upon by Trump and Putin in Syria. However, I struggle to understand why communists or anarcho-communists who seek green legislation from massive world governments as well as limitless migration would oppose such a meeting. I just don't understand it. Do you? Could someone explain it to me? Because I don't think they can explain it. I really don't think they can. Let's just try to parse this. Let's try to figure this out. There seems to be no logical rationale for such a violent revolt beyond simply hating Donald Trump, right? Yet, as I've said, precedence indicates that this has been a long and storied and deep-seated hatred towards these globalist political summits. I must ask again, why? For despite racking my brain, I cannot figure it out. from a rational standpoint. Let me instead offer what I believe the irrational rationale is. Mommy, please pay attention to me. And I think I'm rather justified in that perception, given the number of images that have now surfaced of these middle-class teenagers and 20-somethings taking selfies with their nice new cell phones in front of the rampant destruction for which they are proudly responsible. This is a desperate cry for attention from a generation that has been raised to believe that their left-leaning politics, even if espoused in name alone, and without goal or outcome in mind, make them unquestionably above the pathetic peons whose property they are destroying. This is the cultural Marxist indoctrination that has systematically inundated the academy to instill a sense of infallible moral superiority in those who merely proclaim to hold left-leaning political philosophies, even if they cannot, on the most simplistic or basic level, describe said philosophy, let alone explicate how it defends their destructive behavior. This is a child's temper tantrum being upheld through a collective social identity of moral righteousness. Why else would one be so proud of destroying the property of the working class, of the proletariat that you supposedly are aiming to protect, if not because you do not yourself understand the belief system beyond communal group association with others? These people understand nothing of communism. They understand only in-group and out-group dynamics. That is, we are good and you are bad. This is a morally simplistic, if not toddler-like outlook that appeals only to the emotionally immature and undeveloped. What exactly is your fucking argument, Antifa? Why the fuck everything cost money? I'm sure your friends at Commie Martyrs would be mighty proud of your in-depth understanding of the political ideology you espouse. And that's exactly why even paying protection money toward their violent little group, as you can see here with this sign, desperately begging Antifa not to harm their property with their little Antifa flag there at the bottom, you see it there, and with what you can clearly see on top of it, a beautiful serendipitous crack on the glass outside of it from the said destruction they were begging not to occur to their property. That was not enough to stop the destruction, because they have no moral stance. They have no purpose. There is no desired outcome. This is a tantrum being thrown in the name of anti-fascism, as this massive bundle of sticks forms a paramilitary group and coup for the very purpose of destabilizing society and forming their own. In what image they know not what, as they are mere ignorant pawns, blindly following whoever their masters are and whatever they tell them, all in the name of mere revolt in and of itself. Revolution for revolution's sake, to replace independent thought with collectivist thought. So, while the German media and Twitter has been flooded with images of these ignorant and clueless children burning their city, media outside of the country has sparsely covered these incidences. While there has certainly been coverage, the majority of the information on the front page of outlets in the rest of the West has been more concerned with the politics inside of the G20 rather than outside, as would, let's be real, make logical sense from an international standpoint. However, as usual, the young turds cannot help themselves but cover it in the precise way I would imagine every other foreign outlet is going to cover these riots within the week. That is this. Well, very few fringe individuals caused a couple of little minor boo-boos, but the real problem was the violent fascist police who are viciously attacking these peaceful clowns with their horrible, deadly water cannons like animals, am I right? So, let's listen to them lie hideously about the reality of the situation.
I think there were protesters who went there to actually voice their opposition, others maybe to start a couple bonfires, but outside there were definitely people's voices being heard and saying that the G20 needs to represent the people of Europe, the people of the world. Yeah.
Alright, so they cover some of the basics. And then outright, this lady, Francesca Fiorentini, admits that many of the protesters, not rioters of course, not rioters, protesters, were just there to set shit on fire in addition to voicing their concerns. Again, Franny, what concerns are these? Well, you can't really say beyond to ensure that the G20 represents Europe. Weird, since there are many European leaders involved in the summit, including Angela Merkel front and center. Once more, can anybody figure out what the purpose of these protests? Fuck, now I'm all screwed up in the head. What's the purpose beyond a violent display of adolescent childlike egocentric tantrum throwing as they support the very fascist behaviors they claim to oppose? Do you have an answer? No? Well, imagine my shock.
So this made me realize how different Europe is than the US. Now, of course, I already knew that, but it is like when you get into the details, it's fascinating.
Did you really know that, Cheng? Because I get the feeling you don't know much of fucking anything, considering you call your damn show The Young Turks, you Armenian Holocaust-denying asshole.
First of all, 111 officers injured and dozens of protesters as well. In the US, that is not how the proportion would go.
No.
If there were 2 officers injured, there would be hundreds of protesters injured and arrested. 17 detained when 111 officers were injured?
Yeah.
They were throwing firebombs, right? The protesters were, some. Again, there's Black Bloc and there's the guys who were ruining the peaceful protests. Most of the protesters were wonderfully peaceful, etc., but some were not and smashed windows, etc.
Sure.
Okay, so see here, Cenk wants to try and turn this into an Amerocentric issue. No, Cenk. Also listen for how he hedges everything that he says here as, oh, some, not all, only a few, maybe a couple. He'll talk about how they are wonderfully peaceful, wonderful humans. Oh, it was just these, like, I don't know, maybe 3 people who ruined the protest.
Now, yes, the police had water cannons, pepper spray, billy clubs, they did have all that. But in the US, this is not how it would have gone down.
So Cenk's argument here is that because the United States is different from Germany, that's the real story. It's not how fucked up this is. Do you see what I'm saying here? How they're going to redefine this issue? They're going to take away from the actual things that happened and redefine it in terms that are Amerocentric? This is why I'm making this video, you guys, because we need to look at this while it's fucking happening. We cannot apply Amerocentrism to Europe in many, many cases. This is one of them.
And I know some right-wingers celebrate that. They're like, oh yeah, we would have cracked their skulls and ended these democratic protests so quick, it would have made your head spin or your head crack.
So funny that you say right-wingers would have cracked their skulls, Cenk. Do you know who goes out seeking to bash the fash? Antifa. That's their fucking slogan, you stupid buffalo.
So
by design.
Yeah, and so that's a little different. And then the protesters, there's 160 different groups that are protesting, and they're all progressive, and they have socialists among them, they have all these different groups among them that again in America would have been characterized as like, oh my God, these guys, and look at them, and one of them threw a firebomb, that's it, they're all terrorists, etc.
They are terrorists, Cenk. They are terrorists. They burned and looted the city of Hamburg. They are terrorists. There is a change.org petition. I will throw it up here right now. Now, hopefully it will reach its limit. They only asked for 500 signatures. Please sign it. I know change.org does not do shit, but please sign it if you feel so inclined to have Antifa listed as a terrorist organization in Germany as it has been in New Jersey and hopefully will be across the rest of the United States because they are terrorists, Cenk.
Meanwhile, the German government's like, no, we're trying to give them as much room as possible to protest, to show people like Turkey and Russia that you can have protests in a democracy and not arrest all of your political opponents.
I don't think that's why, Cenk. I think it's because they're castrated, but sure.
The protesters say, look, Hamburg is a very progressive city, and so this was an act of aggression by the government to even have the G20 meeting here.
Right.
Again, topsy-turvy. There is no, like, in the American media, no one frames the government as the aggressors, right? And the protesters as the innocent ones. It's almost always the reverse. It's an act of aggression by the protesters when the government can obviously do whatever they want.
No one frames the government and the United States as the aggressors. Again, I find this entire coverage very disturbing because Cenk has to reframe everything from an Amerocentric point of view. How about you stop that and you look into the shit that you're fucking covering? How about you try to look at it from a German perspective? I know that's difficult and I can't claim to speak for German people at fucking all, nor would I claim to, but at least I don't have to redefine absolutely everything from an Amerocentric perspective. Hamburg is a very liberal city, as we have covered in depth. They are using the fact that this was being held there as an excuse, just to call the government the aggressor. That's all it was. They cannot name their reasons for protesting. Again, name it, and maybe we can have a dialogue, but you can't.
But when you deploy 20,000 police officers, it is, I would say, already quite militarized.
Okay, Franny, quite militarized. Let's look at this Logically, I know this is difficult. I understand you work for the Young Turks. I understand that does not come easily to you. The G20 is hosting the 19 most powerful leaders in the world. And you don't understand why they would deploy 15,000 police officers to protect those leaders' lives. What exactly would you prefer? Would you prefer that they had no police there, or just a small contingent of police officers? Why would that be? Would you like an assassination? Would you like another repeat of World War I? Huh? Is that what you would like? Or are you too just historically and politically ignorant to have any clue why there would be 15,000 police officers monitoring the city during this event?
Right? And as a peaceful protester, I've been there. You're staring down a riot cop, right? You're just trying to walk, and that it's almost like they're preparing for and / know that they want to, that the cops want to start something,
Oh, the cops want to start something. They didn't start anything here. They did not. They were responding. The protesters started this shit. The rioters, to be more accurate, started this shit.
And I think some of the images I've been seeing, and I know there are protesters who throw, whether you consider throwing a smoke bomb back, or a tear gas canister back, an act of aggression, is up to you. But, the images that struck me the most were seeing lines of nonviolent demonstrators sitting down and just water cannons, stuff that we saw at Standing Rock and things like this. And I think that the nonviolent protesters are one that kind of scram later on when Black Bloc comes out and starts getting a little more violent. But
if you are behaving aggressively and the police throw a smoke bomb or a tear gas canister at you, well, it's still their fault. Doesn't matter how aggressive you're being. It's always the police who are at fault, is it not? And again, I'm no fan of the police, particularly not in the United States. But my friend, Franny, this is not the United States, this is Germany. And as I said, friends, this is how the media is going to cover it, with as much delicacy and even-handedness as a fucking bull in a china shop. Remember when I said that the images you're going to see in the media are going to be the few and far between ones of the people being blasted by water cannons while they're not really doing much of anything, and not the burning and rioting and looting? There it is, friends.
Well, and necessarily the numbers are always going to appear when you see the footage. Like, I mean, even us, even the footage we just showed would give you the idea that there's a lot of water cannons, a lot of smoke, a lot of fire. And there's some of that, but we're talking about tens of thousands of people protesting theoretically. And so it's just the nature of the media that they're always going to make it seem far worse than it was. And in the American context, it'd be even worse. That's the only info you'd ever get about this protest, would be those attacks.
Oh, fuck you, buddy. Nobody's covering this in the first place. The fact is that the media that you have to show is violent because they're being violent.
I just want to say that the thing that we need to remember about protests around global capitalism is that before you had the anti-globalists, before you had the Alex Joneses, before you had Donald Trump saying, I hate free trade, there were young people in the streets protesting the G20, the World Economic Forum, the World Trade Organization. The biggest one and the one that started it all was in Seattle in 1999, right? I just want to say that Donald Trump didn't start the anti-free trade movement. Alex Jones didn't start this anti-globalist, which is a super reactionary response to what 20 years ago almost, young people, labor union organizers, climate justice organizers back in the day were out there on the street saying, hey, these economic free trade agreements do not benefit us. And guess what? They were met with repression then. What happened? 9/11. We've completely made a right turn.
Now here's the thing, she's correct. I'm also anti-globalism, but you're not fighting against globalism. These leftist organizations support the exact same type of globalist behavior that these organizations are advocating for. You are lost. You are dinosaurs. You don't understand what you're protesting for anymore. Maybe you did at one point, but at this point, you don't. You do not have a goal nor an orientation. You are just raging for the purpose of raging.
And lastly, I don't want to over-romanticize either the German government and their response or their protesters. So bad stuff has happened on both sides, no question about it. Just a little different context than what you would see here in the US.
There's the part we need to focus on, friends. Bad stuff has happened on both sides. Basically, they're not going to take responsibility. They're just gonna say, oh, well, yeah, they do bad stuff, we do bad stuff. No, that is not the case here. There was one side that has done far worse, Cenk, and you're ignoring it, and the media at large outside of Germany, I think, is going to ignore it, and probably much of the German media as well.
Which leads me to my final point, which is that one of the groups, and you saw their sign there, is Alles für allen. That means everything for everyone. Now, that's the kind of progressive movement in Germany and in Europe that's perfectly acceptable. They probably don't even know what I'm referring to. Like, yeah, everything for everyone. In America, they'd be like, oh, liberal, socialist, communist, everything for everyone.
Yes, they're commies, Cenk. Everything for everyone, that is redistribution of wealth, that is communism. And guess what? No matter how much you like to pretend like it's never been tried, it's been tried. And it never works. Anyway, my point is, I think the Young Turks are going to serve here as a fair measure of how the media outside of Germany will assess these riots in the time to come. They will shift the blame away from the protesters, as we've seen there, and away from the philosophy of modern liberalism, away from communism, and to shift the blame away from personal responsibility. Again, as I have mentioned in the past, there is no single individual exemplar more indicative of shifting the blame away from personal responsibility that is so rampant in modern liberalism than Hillary Clinton herself. Again, sorry to be Amerocentric, but I will this time. Still in search of a new scapegoat to point to for her own failures every single week, it seems, Hillary Clinton is the icon from whence these people draw their strength, at least people like the Young Turds, in terms of their sense of moral infallibility, their unquestionable ethics, even in the face of all evidence and data to the contrary. And while the sword of crying Nazism is a sharp battle cry in the United States, it is nowhere near as dangerous nor more deadly than it is in Germany, where guilt for the Holocaust and World War II is ingrained in its citizenry. How can you fight a culture war? How can you stand up when the opposition holds that one claim to rule them all? Nazi, Nazi, Nazi. Behavior means nothing, no matter how fascist your own actions, as long as you can arm yourself with that word, Nazi. It is both the impenetrable armor and the unstoppable spear of this violent leftist action, and media outlets will uphold the holiness of that claim of you're a Nazi and I am holy and just as the Young Turks have, to illustrate how the Nazi threat has not been eliminated, and how, as such, any action, no matter how abhorrent, is justified. I would bet that within a few weeks, the burning of Hamburg will be blamed by the media at large, at least as much attention as it receives outside of Germany, on vicious, non-lethal fascist police forces who murderously sprayed the people, setting fire to buildings with water cannons, as the true villains, along with Trump, for his mere presence. I would wager that the AfD will also get some brunt of the blame, regardless of how many mental backflips it would take to support that narrative. However, regardless of whether or not my predictions are correct regarding media coverage, we must also and ultimately consider the outcomes not just for the city of Hamburg, but for the German people at large. Will this be blamed on the right and the police? And will it all garner further support for the left, the SPD, the CDU, for Angela Merkel? Or are Germans finally beginning to wake up? As that brief Deutschland trend poll that I mentioned may have indicated, will the burning of Hamburg serve as an example of the outcomes of rampant leftist ideology running wild in the streets, as young people run wild in the streets, with only the most limp-wristed and pacifistic of police force still being treated as identical to the fucking Freikorps, rolling up and putting bullets in the heads of commies? Not rubber ones, mind ya, real ones? Need I again remind us of Weimar, which was plagued with communist extremism, holding entire cities hostage as the German populace became more and more radicalized against communism, as it was being massively imported from the newly communist Russia, despite massive support for socialist policies amongst the general German populace, ultimately leading to the formation of the DAP and the Nazi Party. As I have said before and will say again, look to history if you need examples of the outcomes of far-left violent behavior. they are not pretty ones. For all the screams of Nazi, Nazi, Nazi in Hamburg, the continual outspoken support for groups such as Antifa through non-action may serve as a rallying cry for those who feel they are disenfranchised, for the true proletariat being attacked, vandalized, and beaten, for the average German citizen who just wants to go to the fucking shop, yet cannot because these middle to upper middle class children who are being potentially paid to burn down the city in the name of the working class. Well, I would imagine that would create just a little bit of outrage, would you not? If nothing else, I can say, at least in the case of the G20 riot or protest, whatever you want to call it, Germany is, for once, not fucking over anyone but themselves. Which is a rare statement to make these days, but it's still not a wise course of action, neither for Antifa nor for German politicians to allow this shit to go without any criticism. Given the polls I have mentioned, it seemed that the German public is not entirely in support of these radical protests, no matter how much they may like to feign innocence and finger the police for inciting the massive black bloc into violence, rioting, burning, and looting. No, I believe the German people themselves, not these Antifa, are beginning to have had their fill of leftist extremism. Now that's just me coming from a total external standpoint. I really cannot speak for anything other than what I am witnessing from a very outside standard. But as I've said, need I again remind all of you of the last time something very similar to this happened in Germany. Let us not jump the proverbial gun, of course, on this yet, but given media spin, I could very well see this entire event being portrayed as the fault of the right, as perhaps directly the fault somehow of Donald Trump for merely existing in Germany. And I guess we'll just have to wait and see how this event affects the future of Hamburg. Frankly, at this point, I cannot say I am hopeful. While I am again a mere outsider peering in through a language barrier into German politics, following disappointments in the Netherlands, which was no big surprise, but moreover in France with the election of Emmanuel Macron, and given that Frauke Petry, who I quite liked, is no longer running as chancellor under the AfD, whose polling numbers are already abysmal, I'm afraid my outlook for Germany is a rather grim one. I can only hope that the current state of Germany fucking over Europe for the third time in a century through limitless migration does not very quickly evolve into Germany fucking over Europe for a fourth time in a century and a half with a repeat of the Weimar Republic and ultimately a return to fascist extremism in revolt to leftist extremism. This is perhaps a turning point, or at least the first indication of one. This may be a milestone. We stand at the precipice of a time of both great chaos and great potential to move forward. Where we all end up on the other end of this precipice, however, is still shrouded in the uncertainties of time. To the people of Germany, and specifically, of course, the citizens of Hamburg, my sympathies go out to you. Yet it is also to you upon which the responsibility of cleaning this mess lies. I only hope that that mess is able to be mopped up before it is too late to do so without drastic measures. As I am obviously not a German citizen, nor do I speak any German beyond a basic ability to understand cognates, and as I am several degrees removed from your politics, though, I can only speak again as an outside observer to all of this business. As such, if my take on this is particularly biased, Amerocentric, or outright incorrect, please feel free to shit on me in German in the comments below. I know how you all tend to be into that or whatever anyway. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. I'm Aiden Paladin, Altana Volt.
Wish we could turn back time to the good old days.